If you just say, let's do it live.
Let's do it live.
Ben,
That's really.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm trying to tag Ben in our Facebook post for Chicago Inquisition to show like who's our guests tonight, and it keeps like Ben, your name does not exist in Facebook.
Does it not?
Yeah, it keeps trying to say Ben Shapiro, and I'm like, not on here.
That's my
most views we've ever had.
That's my more subtle. That's my more subtle alter ego.
Okay.
Ben Shapiro.
Yeah,
the
super
other
subtle.
spirit animal, spirit pet.
Makes sense.
Well, I can't do it. I tried.
Ben Shapiro. That would be great.
Just tag Ben Shapiro.
The statistics don't show that. The statistics don't show that. It's not the way that the trend goes, actually, if you pay attention to the details.
That's really
Oh my
good.
gosh.
Speaking of things,
Nicole's
we're not
like,
going to 10-foot pole.
what did I sign up for?
Never mind. That's your first topic. Don't touch that one.
Okay. Should we pray? Does anyone have any other side comments they want to make before we pray?
Oh, plenty, but that's what I'm saving for the podcast.
All right. In the name of the Father, and the Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Lord, thank you so much for bringing us all together here. And thank you so much for bringing Nicole and Ben to this conversation. We're so grateful for this opportunity to come together and talk primarily about you, but talk about just the dignity that you've given to each of us as human beings made in your image and likeness. And we just ask that you give us the words that you want us to share. Just fill our hearts with your truth. And we ask that the Holy Spirit will enter into our hearts as we engage in this conversation about modesty, such a difficult word for women. And as we engage with each other about what that should look like and how did you intend for that to look and how can we best glorify you in the way that we dress and in the way that we carry ourselves. So we ask in your name all of these things, and we ask Our Lady to intercede for us. Hail Mary, full of grace.
The Lord
is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
So
All right.
I have to say, one of the weirdest things about wearing masks in church now is like I always kiss my thumb after making the sign of the cross. And so now I'm like,
I've had that thought too.
Wait. Oh, this is weird. Yeah.
Mask, no mask.
Just had that thought, but
it's keeping you from unsanitary practice too.
That's right. Thank you, Lori. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Can you still suck your thumb at night though?
Yeah, I mean, I don't wear it in bed, so it's fine.
Oh man. 8:03. The jokes are weird. Okay. Okay. All right. So today we are talking about modesty. So actually, wait. We have to do. I feel like way ahead of myself. I haven't even. Okay. So we have to introduce Nicole and Ben. Ben has been with us before. Ben shared with us some like really beautiful wisdoms with Kristen. Nicole, did you know that Kristen was on with us too?
Yeah, I watched that one.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Some really beautiful wisdoms about mental illness and mental health. And so that was such an awesome conversation, for sure. One of our best. So Ben, thank you. And this is so exciting that you're here again. And Nicole, I am so excited that you're here. So Nicole and I, like Zach asked me today how I knew you. And I was like, well, we met on Instagram 2 years ago or whatever. And kind of had like a connection. And then instant connection.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Basically. And then we were both down at SLS together in Phoenix this last year in January. Just spent a lot of time together, kind of like ditched for 3 hours and had a long lunch one day.
Oh my gosh.
And just like bared our souls to each other. Such a highlight. It was so great. So she is like my sister out in DC now, which is just such a gift. So Nicole also, aside from being my dear friend, also is writing a book right now and has a background in fashion and is a makeup artist. And so she has many, many wisdoms to share from the perspective of a Catholic woman with regards to how makeup and clothes and all of these other things that women really enjoy and see a lot of beauty in, how they can serve us as opposed to taking over our identities. Is that a good way of saying that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
So Nicole's writing a book right now. She was just sharing with us that she just started working on the chapter about modesty, which is exciting. I'm excited to hear kind of some of those wisdoms that you have, Nicole. So
We're here to detract from the various wisdoms or wisdom. I don't know how Mary Kate would go with that.
So this is going to be a really good conversation. And how all of this came about, I guess we should share too, is that there are some women in our community who just expressed like an initial curiosity about what the men actually think about the modesty issue. And I think in conversation, and I'm curious to hear what the rest of you think.
It's
but
a
I know
trap.
it's a trap. Don't answer the question. Yeah.
You don't really want to know.
Yeah. No, I think, and Nicole, I
No,
shared
they
this
do.
with you I shared this with you on Friday when we did, so Nicole and I did a live on Instagram for about an hour on Friday talking about modesty and
Shut down Instagram.
yeah. Shout out to Instagram. Follow us on Instagram. Yeah. Just
we
kidding.
could always use new sponsors. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're working on that one. So Miller
heck
Lite,
of a
that's pretty much
sponsor.
all we got. Yeah, Instagram is a sponsor. So we did a live about modesty as sort of like a pregame to this conversation. And I shared with
pregame your conversations.
well, you know what I mean. And so I shared with Nicole at that time that I thought, based on the conversations I have had with you guys about this issue, that you would actually be really encouraging as opposed to convicting of women about this particular issue. And I have a lot of faith that that is consistent with what will be said. So without further ado.
Oh, by the way, so very important aside. So Ben and Nicole, just be sure that you know that we have a group chat here on Zoom that is of very important meaning to our conversation.
Oh my gosh,
so
stop.
much wisdom is shared.
It's
Also,
not.
Please feel free to ignore it while you're.
Please ignore it.
While
I
you're
wish we
talking,
could
because it's
mute
very
it.
easy to get off track.
So, all right, so I'll
Wait,
explain
you
what's
guys get
actually
off
happening.
track?
Dan makes jokes in the group, in the chat down here. So like Nicole, hi, do you see? Dan makes jokes down here. It distracts everyone from what's actually happening in the conversation. So if that was not confused, if that was ever confusing to you, before,
Gotcha.
now you know. So I would recommend just ignoring it.
Close your eyes and talk the whole time.
As Mary Kate reads group chat and starts cracking up. You should ignore it, guys. All right, anyway.
Okay, so it's really nice to see all of you. I'm so happy that we're here. Okay, so the first question, we like to give context in the beginning. So Nicole, you're probably best suited, I think, to answer this question, but again, it's open to anybody who wants to answer. What is modesty and why is it such a hard topic? I know, super loaded question.
I mean, I don't know that I could give like a dictionary definition of modesty, but I know from my personal experience, it is finding a way to dress that expresses who I am without it being distracting to myself or others, so that I feel 100% myself wherever I go. And I'm very present in the moment and focused on whoever I'm with. And also, I guess the point about distraction, like we talked about in our live, is just feeling like whoever we meet and wherever we go, that person is encouraged to look us in the eyes and to see who we are from our face, and that our body is not the first thing that greets them in the conversation. So, sorry, he's awake.
It's so great. I love it.
Yeah.
What was the second thing that you said though? Because I forgot as I started talking.
No,
Like,
I
what
think
is modesty?
what-
And then
what do you think it is that, Nicole, if you have to step away, don't even worry. It's not a big
Okay.
deal.
I just-
Why is this such a hard topic for women? Why are there so many women who have such like a triggered response to any conversation about modesty?
I think because so much in faith circles, and especially when you're like that age when you're kind of like becoming a woman and like you're changing from little girl to older girl, there is so much fear. And I think there's so much like, like the whole idea of like the scarcity mindset, like you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do this. I feel like that's more what we learn as young girls. And then from that moment, as we get older, you're either the good girl or the bad girl. There's no like middle ground,
Yeah.
And so I think it gets very scary talking about modesty because you feel like you're being imposed with a lot of rules that don't speak to who you are and that make you dress in a way that makes you uncomfortable and makes you feel like you're out of touch with the world and you're not an integrated woman. And you know, we hear that phrase all the time, like be in the world, not of the world. And it's like, well, we live in a secular culture and we are Catholics, we are Christians. So we need to be approachable, we need to be relatable. And I think the whole modesty word is like one big frumpy, you know, potato sack, basically.
Frumpy potato sack.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we probably
title of
have
the
the name
episode.
for our episode. Yeah. However,
Wear one, you're modest.
I like what you're
Oh,
saying about
gosh.
avoiding like distracting and you want to feel comfortable with yourself and how you present yourself to others. Because I know like Mary Kate and I have had this conversation in the past about how she's saying in some women's experience there's a level of, even if it's culturally acceptable to like say wear a two-piece bathing suit or something, there's still a kind of uncomfortableness that can occur there. And I think a lot of the things we think of as immodest, we probably know in our heart of hearts are immodest, but exactly what you said with that second part there, how you don't want to, no one ever wants to be told what they can and can't do, which is where a lot of the friction comes with this topic, especially because, I mean, who are the people that are most often talking about modesty? I mean, it's usually Catholic men, right? At least that I see. So why would women want to listen to men about this issue? So, I mean, I do appreciate having you on, Nicole, to be able to lend some a little more gravitas towards this conversation.
That's interesting to hear you say that, John, because I think Nicole would agree with me. Like, I would not have said that Catholic men are the ones who are usually talking about modesty. I feel like this is something that, like, Nicole was involved with Pure. So, like, Regan Christie was Pure Fashion a Regan Christie thing?
Yeah.
I think it was. So, Regan Christie, Nicole and I were both in Regan Christie growing up, and Regan Christie had like an apostolate called Pure Fashion that was basically literally all about teaching women how to be modest. And I think that there was some good there, but maybe a little bit, I don't know, you kind of mentioned it on Friday, Nicole, but anyway, point being, it's like the topic of conversation, I think, between if you're a young girl between the ages of like 9 and 15.
I mean, I have a 6-year-old and we're already having the bikini versus one piece.
Really?
How long should my dress be? Like, all of the things. I mean, I think as a culture, we make the biggest mistake in teaching girls that they can learn about modesty when they're 14. You have to teach them when they're 2, when they're getting dressed and they're like, oh, I want to wear this today, I want to wear that today. And it's like, oh, well, you know, this is a dress for mass. This is what we play outside in. This is what we, you know, clean the house in, like whatever, like giving context to little girls and boys at a young age is what sets those boundaries. And that's essentially what modesty is. It's creating boundaries for yourself and others where you can really be seen and kind of be seen because you're dressing in the context of where you are. So like if you went on a job interview, you're going to wear a blazer. You're going to wear, you know, you're going to dress really conservatively. You're going to not have, for women, like you're not going to have glitter eyeshadow and hot pink lipstick on. Like you're going to kind of be more conservative because that's the context in which you're in. I mean, unless you're obviously on a job interview to be a fashion designer or something. So I think showing people that you can dress within a context creates sort of a freedom where you can enjoy the conversation and it's not an element. Sorry, he's just.
I love it so much.
He's asleep. I don't know
You're doing
what's
well.
going
It's so
on.
great.
He's
You're
like,
doing so
"Yeah."
well. You're doing so well. I love it.
So you.
I just want to say too, I mean, I think we're talking about women already, but I think we should keep this discussion open to modesty as it pertains to men as well, for all the facets involved, because, you know, I think that's one of the inflammatory aspects of it nowadays is it's always, you know, I don't know if it's always men talking about women in the Catholic circles, but it seems to be, there's kind of the general feeling nowadays that men can't really have opinions about women or, you know, what they should be doing. And, we're kind of included in this situation too. So.
Well, that's certainly how I feel. And I think maybe I'm not going to speak for others, but I think it's a common feeling among Catholic men is like, I'm just not going to have an opinion on this because, I'll get yelled at. So, whether
It's
that's
like so classic.
It is a legitimate fear, I think, even
Yeah.
beyond just this issue of just like,
So you guys, why don't you tell Nicole and I like what?
Oh boy.
Can we?
The answer is always burlap sack.
Frumpy burlap.
Frumpy potato burlap sack.
I mean, that was kind of what started this, right? Is that these girls that we know wanted to know what men think about the modesty issue. Because like, as we said, when we hear about this from our moms or like, various youth ministers, whatever, blah, blah, blah. When we heard about modesty growing up, it was always someone telling us as women that we had to be modest. And, there's a balance that has to be struck. And I think we'll get into this at some point. If not, we can kind of start getting into it right now. And I know, Nicole, you and I talked about this on Friday, but this issue is not completely about, I think this issue is often made about protecting men and that's why women have to be modest. And I haven't talked to everyone here, but I've talked to most of you here that I think we all agree that is not the primary reason for placing value in modesty. So do you guys have any like initial thoughts you want to share or opinions or just like perspective on like, what have you heard about women's modesty over the years?
Popcorn Ben Rahimi.
And let's go.
Okay. This is going to be a rehash really quick because I think before you get into this is like trying to derive like all the standards without setting like a baseline for what we're gonna talk about. So maybe before like jumping into like what do you guys think in the particular, starting with like who is a human person, like who's a subject? The trick answer is it's all of you. Everyone is a subject. Everyone is a unique creation of God. Everyone has a unique body that's wholly their own. And it's in those bodies that we encounter other bodies, other people, other subjects. And so that's kind of the first thing is the first principle is you're a unique subject, unique I. I think one of the difficulties that everyone has, and this is men and women, because I think that there's a difference between ego modesty and body modesty. And there's like, we talk about like emotional kind of emotional modesty, the very root of the term modest is modus. It's a measure. It's a measure of a person, which is what I liked about what Nicole was saying earlier. Especially when you're talking about that it keeps you in the present moment, that what you're wearing allows you to not be distracted by yourself first and foremost, and then be a distraction to others after that. Popcorn Dan.
Yeah, so I guess on the modesty issue, I remember just like in the ways that I've initially approached this issue is it's like everything about modesty is about standards. And I realize now that that's not true. So like we set everything about modesty about just like what is the standard, how long does the dress have to be, or how low cut is the top, or men, what's proper attire, and when can you show off the guns and when can you not, right? Like that.
Guns out, guns out.
Yeah, but I realized that like that's like
Simple.
because so what that does is I realized that with like the standard setting, what we do is we try to do like a spiritual calculus or like of like what is the exact right amount, how far can this go before it becomes immodest. And so what we do is we get so absorbed with the standard that we forget that like what we're trying to do with modesty is present ourselves Ben, kind of, as you said, like as a
Yeah.
subject, like you're presenting yourself not as an object, especially like in a sexual way. Like I'm not just a sexual object. I'm a sexual subject, but like I'm a subject, like holistically. And so when I present myself, I'm revealing some kind of truth about myself, you know, and that obviously we're going to talk a lot about like clothing, but that also has to do with mannerisms, including like the way, like the norms in which I behave in. And that will present a lot about like who I am. And so now what I've realized is in a lot of conversations on modesty too, is it's like, it's either like the human, like it feels there's two sides of like a dichotomy. So on one side we have like, think of like the pornography industry where it's like human body, we're going to exploit it. The human body is a walking, talking piece of erotica, to use a quote of a friend of mine whose name is Ben Rahimi actually. But on the other end of that spectrum is like overcompensation, where it's just kind of like, well, the body is a walking, talking piece of erotica that we need to cover up. But both sides of that spectrum are, the human body is a walking, talking object of sexual pleasure. And so we either need to cover it up or need to exploit it. And that's the wrong approach. And so, and that's, I feel like that's the mentality that leads into all that standard setting. And so I guess it's like, what are you trying to reveal about yourself through your dress, and I guess even through your mannerisms too, when it comes to modesty? So I guess that's kind of my biggest thing.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
I was just gonna say, like a lot like Dan, my thought behind modesty and its intention has changed the more I've learned about it. Right. So like through high school and college, it was solely, you know, those exact, this length of dress or skirt, and like, you know, two piece for one piece bathing suits. But you know, you start to realize like, what is it about our dress what does it reflect about ourselves and how we view ourselves as creation? And if we change it to that, like that mentality, we start to see that it's more than just a set of rules. So, you know, I'm still not really sure where I exactly fall on the issue, because it's one that I've refrained from talking about. I don't think I've talked about it with anyone besides Mary Kate, and then just Ephraim like a week ago or so. So it's one that I'm not comfortable talking about, but here I am. So we'll see where the conversation takes me.
I'm curious what you guys think of that phrase, leave something to the imagination, because I think women are told that a lot, especially as young teenagers.
Leave something to the imagination.
And we're told
So
that, you know,
much.
it's like, oh,
Yeah.
put a sweater on, leave something to the imagination, wear a longer dress. It's like,
Yeah.
so what you're really saying is, you know,
Yeah.
I love you. I would love to hear what you guys think about that.
That's
mean-
like that whole modest is hottest thing, right? I mean, Ben,
Yeah,
you
that's
kind of
exactly where I
mentioned
was
this in
going.
your, yeah, go ahead, guys.
Well, I mean, all that is fetishization of a different part of women, right? Like, so it's, as Dan said, there's two sides of it, but like the one is fetishizing a woman that is very exposed, whatever. And the other is just, again, fetishizing something else, but it's still treating the woman as an object. So leave something to the imagination, modest is hottest. Get right out of here with that nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah. The thing is that whole like leave something to the imagination, modest is hottest. Dan, thanks for the quote. But yeah, that it's premised on this idea that you're nothing but the sum of sexual body parts.
Yeah.
And it also is premised on this idea that somehow that the guy that's looking at a woman or woman looking at a guy, that they have the right vision of the world, and that the porn-addled brains of most American, or frankly of most, it's sad statistics, but most Western men, that they can see rightly. And so frankly, for most, like for the porn-addled brain, it doesn't matter if you cover up your shoulder with a sweater.
Right.
They're just as capable of undressing you with their eyes. It's
Right.
So yeah, I don't. More fundamentally, it's about trying to get at the fact that the question for me is always, why do I have such an easy time objectifying myself? Because I have a really hard time seeing other people as subjects, first and foremost, because I can't view myself as a subject. And to draw this very briefly into the mental health episode from 2 weeks ago, you know, you would never tell a subject, a unique creation of God, that your life's not worth living, you're useless, you're this negative self-talk. You would never tell that to a subject. You would say that to an object or something that you don't think is a unique thing. But I tell that to myself all the time. And so it is with most men whose brains are hooked on pornography, is there's a lot of shame and self-hate. And you don't hate a subject, you hate objects. And so modesty for men, especially, becoming more of about like this reclaiming our subjectivity, our unique subjectivity as created male by God. I think in doing that, that will help alleviate some of the, give us a greater sense of freedom so that we don't have to try and stick ourselves with arbitrary standards of quote unquote, what is modest, what's not, how many centimeters of shoulder are you allowed to show?
Right.
To alleviate some of that, because when you get stuck in the standard setting, I feel like it's going to be a real, and Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, by the way.
Sure.
I feel like it's going to be a really difficult conversation to have.
Well, difficult and fruitless, to be honest with you. If you, you know, we just spend the whole time arguing, break out our rulers and just start measuring things and see where we fall.
Yeah, I mean,
does my tie go long enough on my shirt here?
It's very modest, Dan.
I know, it's you gotta dress up suit and tie on TCI modest episode.
What is that shirt you are wearing?
This is my suit that I decided to wear today, Mary Kate.
I mean, here's the thing that I mean, like, so the objective standards, if you want to use that, of modesty, I mean, like, they're there for a reason, and that's a good thing. But I guess, you know, the point of all of this is, you know, it's sad that I think what these other guys are saying, it's sad that we're at this point now in human history where essentially, you know, like, you just have to meet this standard. You have to either be well over in this direction, or, you know, if you haven't hit this checkpoint, you know, you're failing miserably. It makes it really difficult because we are living in such, you know, as you said, Ben, you know, like, Western man is porn riddled mind, but also woman too. I mean, the statistics of, you know, pornography abuse with women or pornography use with women is, I think the last time I heard it was 50% of women. And I'm sure it's higher than that now.
Man, that's even higher than
That's so surprising. Wow.
Which is, I mean, that's incredible, but it's just something that people don't talk about, you know? And so we're all in this sexual mindset, no matter how people are dressing, to, you know, to hitchhike on your point there, Ben, like, you're always going to be able to, if you have that imagination, if you have these things running through your mind all the time, you know, it doesn't matter if this girl's clothed or not, or, I mean, unless she's wearing, you know, 10 blankets when she's walking around outside, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think
A little hot for that.
Right, for sure.
Right now it is, but in the winter it might be nice.
Sure.
Maybe not.
But yeah, no, I'm kind of thinking, like, what is the point of dressing modestly, and so like, to break it into a wider question, what's the point of being virtuous, right? We're virtuous, like, to do God's will and to please God. Like, so I think any conversation along dressing modestly shouldn't be how does this make other people view me, but how does this mean I view myself?
I think that speaks volumes. I mean, what we wear is an expression of who we believe ourselves to be. If we're incredibly self-aware, if we know who Christ made us to be, what we wear is completely like, it's a seamless thing. Like there's no, again, back to that word distraction. Like when you meet someone who is 100% self-aware, they know who they are, they're super authentic and down to earth. You're not really looking at what they're wearing. Maybe it's like adding to it. Like if you meet a really handsome guy and you're like, oh, he's handsome, he's clean cut, whatever.
She's talking to me, obviously. Keep going. Sorry.
You know, or you meet
Thanks
a
for
beautiful
pointing that out.
you notice that
I don't know why I felt like I had to make that joke. Keep going. Sorry.
But I think there's an element of seeing someone as beautiful or handsome, whatever, also noticing that their own self-respect, that is attractive. So I think your attractiveness, your attraction increases when you see someone who respects themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
it's kind of you kind of have that. I mean, I don't know if you guys are in the same situation, and I don't know, maybe it's unfair of me to say, but kind of my first conception or my first idea when I meet somebody who's like really scantily clad, especially in like normal run-of-the-mill circumstances out in public, it's like, man, I really feel like, you know, they're just not comfortable with themselves, or you know, they're just screaming like, notice me, you know, whether it's guy or girl. I mean, you know, you see both now, especially in the city of Chicago, I'm sure in DC walking around. I mean, like you see a lot of both, you know.
So I want to ask the ladies, like, is that true? Because I've met women before who will see that and they'll be like, that is a very confident girl, you know, someone who might be, you know, not wearing much clothing. And so it's like, okay.
It's false confidence.
Yeah.
It's almost like, I don't know how it's just acting like you, it's like the fake it till you make it thing. I'm going to act like I'm confident and I'm going to wear this thing that's going to make people look at me, and then I will be confident.
Right.
And they have no idea what true confidence is, because maybe they're really wounded and maybe no one ever told them you're beautiful.
Dang.
Maybe no one ever taught them how to dress well. Or maybe someone was that shameful voice in your ear of like, you know, because women deal with that a lot of like, you're never going to be beautiful. You're never going to, you know, no matter what you wear. And so, you know, we have a lot of wounds around clothing and how we dress as well.
Sorry, Nicole, right?
No, go ahead.
I would add to that. I mean, I shared with you on Friday that I'm reading that Alison Hildebrand book, and she, it's Man and Woman, A Divine Invention, and she wounds counter one, and we love that word wounds. I know, Nicole, you're just jumping right in. It's great. It's perfect. She talks about, and Dan, you and I have had this conversation about, you know, if a young girl doesn't grow up hearing that she's beautiful and she's worthwhile, then when she does grow up, she's going to think that her worth is dependent upon essentially her utility. Like, you know, her specifically, I would say in most cases, her sexual utility. And I think with men, there's like potentially, I'm ignoring you. I think potentially there's with men a similar type of response to not being valued as a child. But maybe it's more about work or your actual like intelligence or your abilities as opposed to your physical presence. But, you know, like Nicole, I shared with you that story of, you know, I had to give a talk to a group of really young girls on a retreat about modesty and chastity. And I shared with them, you know, something that Jason Everett says all the time, that the woman is the crown jewel of creation, that she is the last thing that the Lord created before, you know, before he took a look around at the world and said how good it was. I mean, you know, she is who Adam looked at and said, you know, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Now I understand myself because I'm looking upon my beloved. And when you say that in a way that young girls can understand, they are just like wide-eyed, like, I can't believe that what I feel in my heart about who I want to be is who God actually made me to be. And that's actually true about me. Like, you know, I think that's what we want as women, is we want people to look at us and see our beauty. And so it's heartbreaking when you encounter these women who feel like they have to do something to achieve those glances. And I think, to Nicole's point, I think a lot of women that we see who are, maybe dressing in a way that they're revealing too much, or I don't know, a lot of things. I think that there's a struggle there with their worth and their identity and where that identity lies. And that's also why this conversation can be so damaging.
I was gonna say again,
damaging
though, too,
and
not even.
Zach.
Oh no, I was just gonna say again too. Not even just women, and also, I mean, modesty doesn't even necessarily mean just scantily clad. I mean, like, think of all the other super outlandish things people could be wearing. That
Totally.
It's the same sort of thing. Like, there's a necessity on this person's part to be noticed. On a broad scale. So
You mean like the trads and their bow ties?
Sing.
Yes. Perhaps.
Isn't that the
I don't
uniform?
know.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm done after that.
I'm sorry, that was me.
Hey,
I'm
we
sorry.
were
No,
talking-
it's good.
Well, and
Nicole,
I think it not only does it make this conversation potentially damaging, the fact but nobody ever wants to admit that the reason they're doing something is because they feel less, or they feel broken.
Sure.
So
Yeah, it's about originality, or it's about,
exactly.
breaking the latest fad, or, whatever.
So that's what makes it a tough. You always get pushback immediately.
Yeah.
If you try to posit that is a reason why someone might be dressing the way they do.
There's also, I was going to say, Mary Kay, I told you I was reading that book called Sex and the Catholic Feminist by
which
Sue
I read
Ellen
while I was
Dotter.
on vacation.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, I want to hear what you thought.
Yeah.
So anyway, this woman worked at Cosmo in like the 60s and 70s, where they basically created the Cosmo woman and created this whole persona and made it so commonplace that they were trying to convince, little old Sally in Wichita, Kansas, that the things the Cosmo woman were doing were being done everywhere. And she was probably the last person on earth to find out that this is how a true, strong, beautiful woman behaves. And so, of course, this was like the beginning of, feminism as we know it in America. And I think that has not gone away. Obviously, it's gotten much worse. But after working in fashion, working for a publication, it's so hard because there's so much undoing that has to be done with how women who I'm the oldest in my family. So I was looking to magazines as like my older sister. I didn't have an older sister, an older cousin.
Amen.
And I wanted to know, what do I wear to a dance? What do I how do I behave in this situation, that situation? What is trendy? What is looking good on my body? And it's so typecast. And, so it's like, you're either this kind of woman or you're that kind of woman. And if you want to be the cool girl, you want to be the fun girl, this is what you need to do. And so many of us are seeking that acceptance from our peers, or we want to have that healthy fear of the kind of the clueless girl where she's like, everyone thinks she's beautiful and awesome, but they're also a little scared of her. I think a lot of women want to feel that way. So they use clothing to do that, but it kind of misrepresents who they are. And then I think, slowly you end up surrounding yourselves in situations that you're like, wait, actually, I didn't want this effect of that choice that I made, so it's, I don't think we realize that by misrepresenting ourselves with our clothing, you can quickly find yourself in a place where you really, really did not want to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ephraim just asked in the questions too, in the chat. He asked, are you guys saying the only reason someone will dress to impress is because they are insecure?
I don't think we're talking about dressing to impress, because when I hear that phrase, I hear, dress for the job you want. When you go to a job interview, you wear a suit and tie, you wear a nice dress or what have you that women wear to interviews. I don't know. But that's dress to impress. That's not insecurity. That's dressing for the occasion. That's going on a date or whatever. Dressing nicely is dressing for the occasion. That's not.
I think we're talking about, the consistent need to shock or to, turn heads in, everyday life, everyday situations. It's one thing if you're, again, we're only just talking about dressing right now too. This goes for so many other things,
Right.
but
So
if it's a habitual need if it's a habitual need to get people to notice you in this way, that's what we're talking about.
Mhm.
So Ephraim, you can keep your paisley suit, wear it well, my man.
So Nicole, maybe we need to like delve into that a little bit then. So can you, and like Ben, if you want to offer some of your thoughts too, what is modest dress when we're really being authentic? Like when a woman is really being authentically modest, what does that look like? And when I say what does that look like, I don't mean like what are the length of her sleeves and what does her skirt look like. I mean like, how can we look at someone, or actually, I'm not going to say that. How can we look at ourselves, how can I look at myself in the mirror and know that like, okay, I'm either dressed modestly or I am not being modest. Does that make sense?
Part of that depends on the culture, right, Ben?
Okay, so actually, Nicole, I'm really interested in your take on this because, the truth is, like, what both of you are wearing right now might be considered in a different historical time and place to be wildly immodest.
Or currently, depending on
depending what community you're in.
I'm sleeveless right now is very
Whoa!
Oh,
it's a heavy topic.
Turn off your
Scandalous,
screens.
The whole thing's gone haywire.
Oh my gosh.
See, we haven't learned anything, everybody. We hope you learned something. We
Well,
haven't.
Tune in next time, I guess. I don't know.
Tune in next time. Okay.
Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
No, I really wanted to hit. So John brought this up earlier, and that modesty is a virtue. And if modesty is a virtue, that means it's something that can be grown in over time, and it's not something that we actually ever reach the full perfection of here on earth. So when we talk about modesty as dressing standards, we start to lose that becomes the myopic focus of this. You start to lose the world that the virtue exists in. And because it'd be like you either pass or fail. Your skirt's either right over the knee or it's not above the knee. Your sleeve is either a little too short or it's a little too, it's too short or it's the right amount. And virtues aren't pass fail. They're things that we, I think that it's something that we grow in over time. And that's where I'm interested to kind of hear the women's take on it, because I think it does get reduced so often to simply, what clothing standards should we adhere to? But if we're talking about a culture, as a Catholic culture, how do we inculcate the real full virtue of modesty? It's not going to just be dressing standards. Modesty is ultimately truth. It's the truth of who you are expressed through the prism of your dress, but also the prism of your language about yourself. An immodest man could be someone who's a braggart. He's not being modest about the measure of who he is.
That's interesting.
So yeah, actually, Nicole, I'm interested in your take on there's different cultural definitions of what modesty as dress standards is.
Sure.
And how does that relate to kind of a growth in modesty as a virtue, as a spiritual intuition of the inherent subjectivity of another person?
Well, I think when we talk about this, we have to talk about the opposite of modesty, which is vanity. And I believe that you can be vain whether you're wearing the potato sack or you're wearing a string bikini at the beach. And I think what we have to understand is that, and I think that's why this gets so murky, is because you see someone maybe wearing something that one person would say, oh, no, you can't wear that. And another person is saying, I'm comfortable, I feel good. This is, I've experienced sort of the Mary Kate and I talked about this a little bit. There's the Marian modesty movement that they believe we should be dressing like our Blessed Mother, covered from neck to wrist to ankles.
Not a
That's
joke.
what our
That's
Lord
a
would
real-
want.
yeah.
It's real.
Marian
That's what our
honesty.
Lord would want. That's what protects our husbands. That's what protects our men. Like it's very much worded in that way. And one of
Protects.
our friends was like shamed for wearing like a knee-length dress
Yeah.
on Instagram with a tiny little slit in it. I mean,
Yeah.
and so can you be vain thinking I'm covered, therefore I am so spiritual, I'm so holy, I'm so
Right.
close to God, I am so virtuous.
Mm.
And then, you
Mm.
know, that woman could look at a woman like me wearing a, dress with no sleeves and being like, oh my gosh, she is
Scandalous.
just, exactly scandalous. And not know the intentions of my heart, not know the disposition of my soul, whether or not I'm in a state of grace. I mean, so I think when we think about being modest in our speech and in our dress and in our behavior, we also have to think about what are our intentions. Is vanity where this is coming from? Do I want to be noticed? Do I want to be chosen first? It's kind of like the opposite of that litany of humility,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I was literally just thinking that. Yep.
Really. Yeah. So it's like, do I want to be preferred over someone else because I'm more stylish or because I dress more like the Blessed Mother does, dressed. And so I think that's where discernment comes into this. And I think whether you're a man or a woman, religious or not, like, I've seen priests that drive really fancy cars. And I've always kind of thought, like, I noticed that. I always notice that more than a priest that drives a Honda. There's not saying anything about his soul or whether he's a good priest or not, but you notice it, And so it's more of like, I guess, just trying to express who you are in a way that doesn't give into vanity, that doesn't give into that need for affirmation, where you're just getting your affirmation from Christ and you feel completely at peace with that. And I think when we meet people on the street, you can tell when someone who is just at peace with who they are and with someone who's not. And it doesn't matter what they have on, or what they look like or where they're from or what college they went to. Like, it's more
She
about like,
drove a Cadillac.
I love Bishop Sheen. Well, and so, and to that point, like, I am a woman who loves things that some people might consider a little extra. It brings me joy. It's kind of playful. It's kind of fun. Another woman might look at me and be like, oh my gosh, she is so flashy. Like, I can't even believe she's wearing that to whatever event or whatever.
Sure.
And so there's an element of discernment in that too, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And owning up to the fact that it's like, that's why, like, the difficulty and sometimes fruitless over discourse on trying to parse together the perfect standard of modest dress, because like, you like things that are a little bit extra. I sometimes look, to use another word the kids use, ratchet.
Ratchet.
I'm kidding.
You'll have to describe that one.
I'm kidding.
All right.
I just had to use that word on a podcast about
You
modesty.
dang kids.
Right, no, that's
Now he's
Um,
gonna sign off. So
Bye, guys. No,
did what I came to do. Bye, guys.
yeah. Kevin and I's plan worked perfectly. Yeah, is this? It's kind of there'll either be on the one end the never-ending one-upsmanship of how much less clothing can I wear and get away with it, or on the opposite end, the never-ending one-upsmanship of how much more clothing can I wear and be more pious than you.
Yeah.
Which I had no idea that movement existed, and I'm crying inside.
It's aggressive. Is that the word?
do you want to join it, Ben?
I mean,
that why you're crushing?
I'm wearing blue right now, so I'm pretty
well
sure
on your way.
I
Well on
already
your
have
way.
a suit, so
So, you guys, I'm curious then. So we've kind of like sort of circled around this topic, but we haven't fully addressed it. I'm curious what the takes are on this balance between like being modest for the sake of protecting the other and being modest because it is dignifying to me as a person made in the image and likeness of God, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I shared with Dan the other day this like experience that I think a lot of women have of feeling this like very heavy responsibility to protect men. And there are moments, like Nicole, I'm sure you can attest, there are moments that women have like a sort of accidental moment of immodesty that it's like not intentional, did not anticipate that that was going to happen when I walked out of my house today. And you feel like, what have I done that I have just exposed not only myself, but this other person to the occasion of sin through my immodesty? And I think that there's like a conversation to be had around that experience because, because I think that it places this, women inherently feel like great responsibility
Sure.
there. And how do we make that something that also men, on the flip side of that, have a responsibility in those moments when they occur and that man recognizes that this just happened, to dignify that woman by either, you know, in some shape or form, responding in the right way. Does that make sense? I know I'm like speaking very vaguely.
Yeah,
I
I'm
could give an
like-
example. I don't feel like I should, but
Sure.
you know.
Well, and Mary Kate, I would confess in a situation like that too, just because I think all of us, men and women, have been conditioned to kind of view modesty as like, these are the rules. And when the rules are broken, even on accident, it's like, oh my gosh, immodesty, right? And so in that kind of situation, my reaction, sadly, probably would have been the same as like a lot of other men. It's kind of like, you know, whoa, what's going on there, right? And like, not because I'm consciously thinking through my reaction, but just because I just feel so conditioned to the rules mindset of modesty. And I don't think that's right. So, and I think part of what makes setting the modesty standards is, like you said, so on one end, like if men and women, if we don't view if we don't view ourselves as subjects, then how are we, like, it's very hard to view the other as subjects. So what I mean when I say that is, so I know a lot of, like you were saying, a lot of women might feel like there's a pressure to kind of protect men in some capacity. But the problem is that men also have agency, like they have free will, and like they have conditioned themselves. I mean, pornography is like kind of the number one example I think of like men need to take responsibility in the way that they view not only themselves, but other women. And so it's not to say that, you know, you ladies don't, is there some kind of like a protective element? I guess you could maybe argue that, but that's not the meat and potatoes of the whole thing. Like that's only part of the discussion. So
because I think that's the language that's what the language that we use implies, like that, you know, that we have to like, I don't.
Well, so like protect what? Like protect men's eyes from the, you know, the sexual object that is a woman's body. Like that's what I feel like it kind of implies. And like, again, like that's not the right way we should be looking at it. And so, so there's a story when I was in Peru, we were helping distribute some supplies to like a very, very poor community down there. And there was this one moment where like all these very like homeless, not homeless, but like just like families who have no income or anything like that are coming to the church to pick up these objects. And there was a woman, maybe in her like late 20s or early 30s, who was breastfeeding her kid. And then she was like completely topless. And so like in America, that would just like draw a ton of negative attention. But I remember just like I saw that and I like looked over another seminarian and like he had noticed it too. And it was just kind of like, this is like a thing. Like it wasn't just kind of like, oh my gosh, you know, that's so bad or anything. But it was just like, I mean, first of all, it was in a way, I mean, it was kind of beautiful because she's nursing her kid and she's just like, you know, that's her priority. But on the way home, we were talking about it and the two of us are just like, this is just like, I mean, that says a lot, not only about the way that she views like what she's doing, but also how the people around her, I mean, she was in a crowd of people, like the way that they view this kind of a thing is like they, in some capacity, it's not to say that everyone in that crowd was not perhaps would not lustfully look at something like that, but there's something to be said about just the way that people look at that culturally in a different way. So I don't know if
that's super interesting. Yeah, because I feel like that could be like a whole other episode of like women feeding their children in public, whether or not that's kosher. Something I was thinking of though when you were saying that, Dan, is like maybe another way we can talk about this is that by dressing immodestly to the point that it is distracting, maybe we're creating a sense of like false intimacy with whoever we're seeing. You know, like if someone can see so much of you, the way that they maybe would if you were much more intimate, then maybe they feel like they already know you, you know, and they already know what kind of a person you are. And I think that's where women who are same age as us, Mary Kate, who maybe fall on the other side of the spectrum of this, would say like, well, I can wear what I want and it shouldn't matter and it shouldn't affect you. And it, you know, and it becomes this sort of like angry thing. And it's like, well, I think what they're forgetting is that by showing so much of yourself that I can see like every outline of your body, you're creating a false sense of intimacy with everybody, not just the men, like the women too, like we're seeing you too, you know? And it can be uncomfortable. Like I've been places with my daughter who's 6 and she's like looking at me like, what's going on over there? And I'm like, I'm sorry. Like you know, and it's hard to explain, you know, teaching moment, but.
Yeah. So how do we, I don't know, how do you guys think that, how should this be communicated to, I mean, like, you know, Nicole, I love when you talk about, you know, these conversations that you have with Cecilia, because I feel like it's so organic, or like that's the moment, you know, like I mean, gosh, I tell people these stories all the time about things my mom said to me that I remember. It was like, okay. And then that was the moment I became that person, and in a good way. I mean, because like, you know, like my mom set standards and I remember her saying those things to me. So like, as a mom of a daughter, like what's the right way to communicate this to young girls, you know?
I think going back to what you said about being the crown jewel, little girls respond very well and identify immediately with being told that they're the daughter of a king. And if you're the daughter of a king, you're a princess. And it doesn't mean you're a brat, and it doesn't mean you're the, you know, whatever that story was where she's on 15 mattresses and she feels the pee under her bed. It's not that kind of a princess. It's the demure, elegant, like Audrey Hepburn version of the princess. And what that really means is that she's aware of her body. She's aware of her clothing. It's like what you were saying before about like you leave the house and like you clearly haven't taken that outfit for a test drive yet, and then all of a sudden it is failing you badly. Like
that is exactly the right way to say that.
Like we've all been there where
that's what we call a big yikes.
Sure yikes.
There. Haven't heard that in forever.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that mindset that I've been trying to kind of impart on my daughter, and I think that we can, even as adult women, kind of heal from wounds that we may have over modesty, or whether they came from either side of the extremes, is that going back to that inherent dignity, like you're a creation of God. He looks at you with the most tender gaze as his daughter, or as his, you know, as his son. And in order to kind of be a representative of him here on earth, how would he want you to go out into the world? Like, what is he calling you to do? And it's so much about your lifestyle, your vocation, your gifts, like all of this is like, it comes into play, of where you're called to be, how you're called to serve, what your state in life is, in your present moment. Like style changes over your lifetime because you change, which is a good thing. Like we should be changing. And I think people forget that too. Like you see the before and after shows, and there's some lady in her 50s that's still dressing like she's 17 on the back of a Harley. And you're like, okay, there's a disconnect here. Like clearly you're holding on to that when you're not embracing current reality, you know? And so I think just teaching young girls that style and who you are and what your vocation is like need to be kind of readdressed and every year, like as you grow and as your body changes, you know, like that's a whole other thing too.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
Mary Kate, on your podcast, I think I mentioned that like the reason that men know that heaven is beautiful is because women are beautiful, because like in some ways that women provide like a foretaste of what the heavenly beauty is going to be like. And I think in some ways, though it's tragic, but I think in some ways what's tragic is like so many men are addicted or at least regularly looking at pornography. But the fact that that's so rampant in some ways, because like pornography is like a distortion of like using women's beauty like objectively, right? But like the thing that, but still like what makes pornography so appealing to so many men is because like they do recognize beauty even when it's distorted. And so again, just like the beauty of woman, if that can be acknowledged by men, that would be just a total game changer.
Yeah, and it starts with recognizing that the body is fundamentally good. And one other thing that was striking me as we were talking about this is, thank you for that, Nicole, is that if you're not seeking after Christ on the daily, the conversation about dress standards is pointless. Because if you're not talking about Christ and living and striving to live in some form of relationship with him, to live in that relationship that was one for you, yeah, the dress standards are going to be oppressive and pointless. So it's only if you're following Jesus that they make any sense to begin with.
It's the same as any law, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Or, I mean, you want to call it a law, you know,
yeah,
any guideline.
Any type of standard. And then also living in the freedom that Christ has won for you. So it's like, yeah, the church isn't going to tell women or men how exactly to dress and give us the dress code for, you know, Catholic school. Right. Unlike Catholic school. But I think some people want that, whether it kind of comes out of a sense of control, a sense of certainty. One thing Kevin and I were talking about before we came on the podcast was, I think oftentimes people within the church, the members of the church, are scandalized by just how much freedom we do have. And people outside the church are scandalized by the seemingly paltry freedoms we seem to not
Interesting,
don't have.
Yeah,
that's so true.
And I think with modesty, I think this is an area where that freedom can be embraced more so, is that there's a plethora of millions of different styles that are perfectly modest. That said, I am no expert on fashion. You know, I'm not sure why I was brought in as the image of male modesty, but you know, here I stand.
Just look at him.
I mean, just gaze upon the shirt.
Gaze.
But yeah, like this, there's a lot of freedom here, which is both very scary, because it means that there's that room to kind of mess up and make mistakes, but it also means there's that room to grow. And that means if there's room to grow, that means there's room to grow more perfectly.
Well, you know, I want, like what you're saying about like a lot of people want the church to weigh in more specifically. And I think this is true in a lot of matters, but I think this second reason why you gave like a sense of certainty, I think people just want to know. And this kind of gets back at what Zach mentioned a while ago about how when we start seeing, and I think you mentioned it too as well, Ben, about like pass fail, when we start seeing a virtue as like, all right, here is the bare minimum of what I have to get to. So if the church can please just weigh in, tell me the bare minimum of how I have to dress in order to be okay, in order to, and I'll do that. I'll just do the bare minimum. I'll just get by and I'll succeed in dressing modestly. So yeah, I think that's probably where most of that desire to see guidelines comes from.
Yeah. That's kind of like the how far is too far question in dating too.
Yeah.
People just want to have like one answer, you know, that's.
So and also there's a little bit of like, tell me what the rules are so I can find the loopholes, but I'm still following the rules, you know, like I think there's that very real temptation. And like, you know, I'm the oldest of sisters. I know that like we had rules about how we were supposed to dress and we found the loopholes when we were able, you know, like I think that's like there's a very real element there. But so if it's not about the standard,
Catholic schoolgirl.
disposition of heart.
Oh, did you wear a hat indoors, Mary Kate?
Okay, well, that's a boy standard.
Sorry, John.
Sorry,
No.
Kevin in the
kidding.
chat too, so that's
No.
fine.
Keeping the sun out of his eyes. Leave him alone.
That's right.
Actually, though, really quick, I want to circle back on something Ben said, because Ben was talking about freedom. And I think something that I was thinking about with reference to maybe something, Dan, that you sent to us. I don't remember what it was exactly, but I think the freedom comment is important. I mean, is it Bishop Barron who says that? Bishop Barron? JP2? It's
Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Secular.
One of them says something to the effect of like, true freedom is like the ability to do what we ought. And so
JP2.
That's
Yeah.
Is that JP2? Okay.
JP2.
Yeah, JP2, Bishop Barron, whatever. So
Definitely not Bishop Barron.
with
Uninhibited
regards
ability.
to
Okay.
with regards to, you know, the conversation about women dressing to protect men, or, you know, men, I don't know, whatever, you know, whatever the context of the conversation is, I do think that there is a space here to recognize that modesty in its most authentic form encompasses all of the above, because we are free to make the right choices about how we dress. And as a result, these good fruits do come from it, you know? So like, for example, like when I'm thinking about like what I'm going to wear to like, you know, hang out with you guys on a weekend, like it is good that I consider the fact that I'm going to be with good men who I respect and love and don't want to present an occasion of sin for any of us, you know? I mean, so I think there's goodness in that. And I am free to think that way when I choose what I wear, you know? So I think just within that context, the disposition of heart thing that was said a couple times, but like, I just feel like we just like need to like pound that into the ground in the sense that like, it is about where your heart is at.
Yeah.
And like, you are either like, you know, I mean, like you can follow every standard in the book, but like, if you don't have a humble heart that wants to protect the people around you from sin, wants to present yourself as a dignified human being made in the image of likeness in God, like if you don't authentically desire those things, you are going to make mistakes with this, as we all do with sin, and that might happen anyway. But you know, I just think that like that's what the pursuit has to be. The pursuit has to be the modest disposition of heart, the humble disposition of heart.
Sure.
Definitely.
Go ahead, Zach.
No, I mean, yeah, no, I've just been tossing around kind of in my mind. I mean, it might be kind of segueing here, but in a hypersexualized culture, I'm just wondering what the answer is, whether it's bring back a certain standard of modesty, or is it, you know, as you talked about this, the amount of freedom that we have within the church that a lot of people probably, you know, aren't aware of or would be shocked to find, you know, what is the answer? And in a lot of ways, I think it's a difficult situation because it's you know, like Ben was talking about, it's not a black and white situation. I mean, obviously there's borders and there's boundaries to all of this, but a lot of it is gray. And so living now as we do it, and probably, you know, at least for a while, the most sexually saturated culture that's been around for a good amount of time, you know, what is the answer?
Mary Kate, this makes me think of what you were saying. I think we talked about this maybe like off of our live, but about whether or not like our yoga pants, you know, or like, you know, like I'm curious to hear.
The door got opened.
Yeah.
Oh, dang it.
No, we're going down.
No, that's so good. No, I'm so glad she just said that. That's so good. Yep.
Well,
yep.
because
All right, men. See you later.
there's
I've got a call.
Keep
or like
going.
a guy going for a run shirtless, you know, like, okay, there's two forms of everything.
That's a question.
It's, yeah, I lost my train of thought because that was funny, but
Sorry.
you know what I'm trying to say.
You guys are making jokes. Yeah, we know what you're trying to say.
That's what we do on this podcast. Hey, so real quick, I guess I wanted to kind of talk. So the inner disposition aspect, I think, is so awesome and so key. And in the Catholic Church, like, so we talk about that the sacramental reality of the world and the sacramental aspect of just so much of creation, and how there's an inner reality that's being expressed outwardly, right? And so if our inner, like Mary Kate, like you were saying, I mean, if our inner disposition is a certain way, then our exterior clothing or our behavior and things like that is going to reflect that. And while it may not tell the entire story, it gives us an insight as to the inner reality, right? It's kind of like how physical creation itself can't fully illustrate the inner divine reality that God's giving us, but in some ways it points to it. And so like if we view what we clothe ourselves with in some ways as like this is a sacramental representation of like who I am, that in some ways might help us present ourselves like more dignified. So yeah, maybe some food for thought.
Yeah.
And we've gotten so casual as a culture as well. Like now wearing what you wore to your basketball game is perfectly okay to wear to mass if that's the next thing you have to do on your calendar.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, and I think we've lost this sense of like
Reverence.
this clothing is for this, like yoga pants are for exercise, bikinis for the beach, etc. Like I think that's where like parents are not teaching their kids this. Maybe it's pressure from other parents, from their peers at school, or maybe it's just
The
this cultural change that we've made where, you know, guys don't go around wearing suits like Cary Grant did, and that's okay. Like it's okay for the cultural change, but I think, you know, there's beautiful ways to dress in our culture that's not like overly formal and kind of like, you know, untouchable. That's still say, hey, I'm going to this thing and I'm dressed for that thing, you know, or wherever I'm going.
Yep. Let's circle back on Nicole's question because I want to know what you guys think. Let's broach.
I thought Dan had deflected it accurately.
No, I'm not going to let you guys deflect. I want to know.
I tried so hard, boys.
Mary Kate, we should do like lightning round and just say an item of clothing and then whatever first thing
just say yes or no.
No, we have to say modest or hottest.
Oh
no!
Do the classic.
We need a game show theme.
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant.
Name,
I don't know. I'll wade into
You
this
guys,
situation.
it's cool. Just like give your take. Like it's
women
perfectly
want
fine.
to know. They
Zach,
really
come
want
on.
to know.
I'm
And I
going
would
Zach, get the
even,
ukulele
Let
out.
go.
even as
I
like
don't know,
a
it's
newly
packed away
married
somewhere.
wife, like I wanted to know what my husband thought of like,
Yep.
you think this is
That's
okay?
fair.
Should I wear this to that thing? Like,
Yeah.
is this skirt okay? And like, I would look to him for that affirmation or like a real simple, like, maybe try something else, you know, like.
Yeah. So that's a difficult, okay. So this is why this is such a difficult conversation is because ideally I would like to sit here and say to everybody who's watching or listening, that, you know, my mind was totally free of any sort of impure thought or any sort of, you know, tendency to lust or, you know, that my mind's not damaged by things from the past or, you know, modern culture, whatever, but it's just not. I mean, it's not that way, rather. My mind is plenty damaged from all of these things. And so it's a difficult situation to wade into because ideally, like we've been kind of lobbing up for this entire episode, I wish that I could see women in public walking around in all of the things that women wear nowadays. And this is just my opinion, but I wish I could look at these women in a very, you know, in a brotherly way, rather than always being drawn to this or that. But unfortunately, I just can't. You know, I wish I could. And so a lot of times my go-to is custody of the eyes, you know, like you just look somewhere else, or you have to, you know, kind of find your way to another spot because it's difficult to deal with. This is me. This is my take. You know, I'm not blanket stating this for guys.
Yeah, it's all good. I think you said that well, Zach.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's just the truth. It's very difficult nowadays, especially in the summertime, walking around the city.
Yeah.
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
And I'd echo that. But I realize that in part of that too is my own gradual working on having greater custody of my eyes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's not right again, and I know Zach feels the same way. It's not like, oh, it's all on you ladies or anything.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would never sit here. I mean, like, there are plenty of guys nowadays who are guilty of the same, I mean, wearing super tight clothing or showing off things that they don't, you know, that I don't know, like, I don't want to see dudes walking around wearing the things that they're wearing sometimes, you know. I mean, just being totally honest with you.
Yeah.
But guys have the same problem
Neither
with
do I.
modesty nowadays, you know.
Yeah.
Like, never
Yeah.
mind. I was thinking about David Bowie for a second, and then my mind.
I was thinking of all the Guidos in Long Island that I grew up seeing. So, yeah.
Hey.
Hey.
Come on.
Yeah, you know, and I guess there is this element in this conversation of like, I think some women, and I like, Nicole, you'll probably roll your eyes with me about this. You get those women who are like, talk about the catcalling and like oh, women can't even walk down the street without men harassing them. Like, there is like a certain element of truth to that, but it's also like, I think, I don't know, I personally have just like, as a woman, you just recognize like, this is just the reality of what it is. So I think, but with regards to what you're saying, Zach, I think that's where a lot of women feel like a little bit of a resistance to hearing from men about this, because I think a lot of women feel like I could be wearing, what did we say? Like I could be wearing like a brown paper bag and men would still make comments at me and still embarrass me. And that is true.
No, that's absolutely true.
So it becomes difficult, I think. And I mean, speaking of lines, I think you could follow all the modesty standards in the book and still find yourself in an embarrassing situation.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
And that's again, that
Yes.
I think that points exactly in the direction that, you know, I don't know. I don't always mean to be talking so generally about all these things, but I mean, honestly, we live in a sexually saturated culture. I mean, you drive down the street, there's billboards for strip clubs and, you know, all sorts of stuff in the Chicagoland area, at least everywhere. And yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, like being at work, like riding around in the fire engine out there, like some of the guys that I'm with, we all have headsets on and we can all hear what the other guys are saying. Like, you're absolutely right. You know, a girl could be dressed very nice walking down the street, and you're still going to hear all the same garbage that people, you know, are going to say. And that's because their mind's totally oriented, you know, and I'm not trying to just like cast off the problem on other people apart from myself, but typically, you know, especially with the problem with pornography that modern man has, everybody's mind goes one way and then you just kind of let it go, you know, you feed into that.
I feel like there's a connection here between this and then Jesus's this kind of statement, like if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, chop it off. The thing is, I think that misinterpreted. So like you mentioned custody of the eye, Zach.
Yeah.
And I am going to, I don't want to say push back, but maybe challenge you.
Do it.
To, oftentimes we take custody of the eyes to mean like, I need to pluck my eyes out. AKA I need to avert my eyes. I need to just shut them or see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And yet, one of Jesus' other statements is that it is not what comes from without a man that makes him unclean, but what comes from within.
Absolutely.
And so maybe shifting our understanding of what's interiorly going on is that there's a shifting our gaze from like the visual gaze to a appreciation of the fact that women are beautiful. And thanking God for that, rather than trying to do like I've seen guys who get the rubber band, and every time they get like an impure thought, they snap the rubber band, and
the painful response to beauty.
You're conditioning yourself to say like that's bad. Like again, it's the same thing we talked about.
That's really interesting.
The Pavlovian pain teaching. But yeah, basically it means that okay, that woman's body is bad, I shouldn't look at it. No, what the thing that you're not praying with, not you, sorry, Zach, this is not
No,
directed at
that's
you.
fine.
This isn't directed at you anymore.
He means John, not you.
Dan, I'm looking at you.
I'm wearing a suit. You better watch out.
I'm wearing a suit.
It's an
Is that
orange suit.
the thing we're not praying about is, why is it that my gaze is consumptive? Why is it a consuming gaze? Why is it not an appreciative, like,
Wow.
act of gratitude? And I don't think, like, I didn't take that to prayer for a long time, and I did a lot of, like, averting my eyes, living in a lot of the same wounds. I'm not sure what count that is, but wounds for much of my life.
Wow.
And not once did I think to pray with the fact that I should, and I think that's one of the great insights of JP2's theology of the body, is the reclaiming of the goodness of the human body. That it's not just, like I kind of wrote in that thing, like a walking, talking piece of erotica that we need to
Absolutely
always kind of be on the guard against. There's
Right.
vigilance, to be certain. But that vigilance is going to be much more of an internal vigilance of, like, okay, what's my, like, I think Nicole's hit on this beautifully, multiple points. What's the intentionality? Mary Kate, you've hit it on too. Like, what is my intent when I look at, like, if I see this woman? Because it's not just the immediate sight of a woman wearing yoga pants that's made you sin. There's other steps along the path there.
Wow.
And you do have choice in those moments. And part of, like, growing in freedom is that ever increasing gap between, like, seeing a beautiful woman and the act that you, like, that gap between experience of phenomena and action. And it's that space that you have, that moment to decide what to do with that. And for most guys, there's very little space, and it's just look, consume. There's no space to consider, like, am I about to consume? No, you know what? I choose not to. Like, let's go on with the day.
Wow.
Yeah, because that's the porn thing, right? It's like,
Yep.
you look and you immediately consume. There is no gap
Exactly.
whatsoever. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's great.
That's
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly why, I've struggled with it, and I'm sure many other men struggle with it, is because you're just conditioned to consume.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we, I mean, just like biologically, men and women, when we see, like, someone attractive, like, we're going to react to that, right? I mean, even
Right.
just, like, biologically, but
I mean,
it's
you
like,
should.
well, yeah, and like, and you're
Yeah.
gonna have thoughts, but thoughts themselves are not evil, right? Thoughts themselves are not evil. It's what you do with your thoughts that's evil, because you can choose at that point where those thoughts go. Like, that's where it turns into lust, right? Is like, oh, look, thoughts, and then it's like, and now the thoughts go that way. And so, like, so I thought it was awesome, Ben, that you said, just like, where you're able to, like, thanks be to God that, like, that woman was beautiful, or like that women in general are beautiful. You thanks be to God, and then you move along, as opposed to like a punishment or anything like that.
Yep.
I'm curious, do you guys make like a mental note of someone, like, let's say there's a woman that you meet and she is wearing a more attention grabbing outfit. Do you make a judgment in your mind about what her heart is like what kind of a person she is? Does that enter at all? Or is it more just like, oh, she's wearing something and my mind goes right to, consume? Or do you kind of write her off? Like, I'm curious, because I think as women, sometimes we don't see that part of it. Like, we see, like, I'm trying to be cute, I'm trying to be fun, I'm trying to be stylish. Maybe we don't realize that we might be getting written off for, not having intelligence, not having good character. Like, I don't know. Is that something that happens too?
I would say for me, it would have to be a repeated thing. I don't tend to make snap judgments, because, like, I never know if I see someone dressed quote unquote immodestly, whatever that entails in this particular situation. But my immediate thought is not a judgment, because I don't know, like, where they came from. We had this, like, the question came up in the chat, and we've talked about it a little bit here about, like, I think context is important in terms of dress. So if I meet someone and they're like walking on the sidewalk and say they're wearing yoga pants and like an athletic top, and if I just saw them, I'm thinking, okay, they're coming from workout, they're going home. Like, I'm not gonna think much of that. But like, if then that's repeated, like yoga pants are just their normal attire, like, they come over and that's just what they wear every day, then I start to build up more of a thought of like, this is how this person dresses, and I think that's inappropriate. But I think context is huge in regards to what we wear. Like personally, I don't find like two-piece bathing suits to be that distracting when I'm at the beach or I'm at the pool, because that's what people wear. Maybe I'm desensitized to it. I don't know if that's part of it, but all I know is when I'm there, I don't think much of it at all, because it makes sense in the context of where we are right now. If I saw someone walking down the sidewalk in a two-piece suit, obviously that would be much different. So I just think context is important.
From the women's perspective, and John, you and I just talked about this a couple of days ago, and I think I shared this with you then, and Nicole, we've talked about this, but there's also this element for women that like I recognize, like I make certain choices about like the types of bathing suits I wear and things like that, because I also recognize that some of those outfits, while they might not be distracting for other people, are distracting for me. So like I choose to wear one-piece bathing suits because two-piece bathing suits, I personally find myself thinking more about me than I am being present with the other people like that I'm with, whether it's like my family or friends or whoever it might be. And I think that as women, that is something to be cognizant of, because there's a very real element there of like, I am wearing this outfit because it's cool and it's cute and it looks good on me. But like, when I go out in public wearing this outfit, am I actually thinking about, am I distracted by what I'm wearing? Like, am I like pulling on my clothes and adjusting and like thinking about whether or not I'm like falling out or something? You know what I mean? Like, am I like thinking about me, or am I like able to be free to like think about the people that I'm with and like, enter into that? And so I think like to your point, like maybe that's where there's this crossover from like, from thinking of the other to thinking about like, ourselves, like how am I dressing myself? And if my mind is totally preoccupied by that, then I think that's an indicator that like I should wear something else. But I also think that's a female experience. Maybe you guys, I don't know, maybe you do experience that sometimes. Maybe that's unfair.
You guys experience that?
John, have you ever been asked to take off your leggings in a public area?
What?
Put on something else?
Okay, well, I can.
There is a lot of debate about length of swimsuit for guys, though. That is a thing.
Oh, really? That's
Really?
funny.
I've never
Are you talking
seen
about
it.
like Speedos versus
Or like whether
trunks?
they're
Or,
like
Trunks
whether the
versus
trunks are too
men's
high
yoga
above the
pants.
kneecap, like
What if men
Guys'
wore
shorts are
yoga
getting
pants?
shorter these
all
days.
I'm
and
thinking about
not
is
for
what
them.
gets me through
Yeah.
the water the fastest. How am I the most dynamic in
To
this
the birthday
midget?
suit. Swim, baby.
Oh my gosh. Okay, you
No,
guys,
seriously though, Nicole, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to kick
No,
that off.
no.
Was
I'm
that-
just something happened one time where I was at the beach with my husband and he had on these swim trunks and
Oh,
some
no.
other man complimented him. He was like, "I'm never wearing those again." Like ever.
Ooh, wow.
And it was just like, swim trunks, whatever. But it's funny. I think some people have opinions about the length of how
that
it
is
should be.
really funny.
Yeah.
Man.
So
Get
you
Steven
guys,
on TCI.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. Whenever we're talking about swimsuits and something happened, it's probably not going to be a good follow-up.
after the swimsuit conversation,
Yeah. Something happened.
I was actually, I was gonna.
I won the race.
All right. So is there anything like any burning questions that we haven't touched on, or I know there's some questions maybe in the chat.
There's some really great questions.
one.
Sorry, John. Good. Go ahead, John.
John,
sorry.
you had said one that you wanted me to answer.
Yeah, I mean, Ephraim just brought up it was way back when we were talking about dressing to impress and dressing for attention, et cetera, et cetera. So he brought up the question, where does something like jewelry, he said specifically earrings, but like where does that fall into like dressing for attention or anything like that? So he was just wondering, and I feel like Mary Kate, you have had a good experience with this.
When it comes to actual like piercings, you mean? Or
Yeah,
that's what the question was.
we're not talking about like
we have
stud
talked
versus
about
dangly earrings.
yeah.
Sorry.
So big hoops, no.
Oh, that's not true. I like big earrings. You guys have seen me wear big earrings before.
I know.
What about getting them caught on something?
That happens sometimes. My niece ripped one of my earrings out of my ear the other day.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Carnation.
No, my take on this, I think, John, I assume this is what you're referring to, is I used to have my nose pierced, and I didn't have it pierced for very long, and I was very aware of people looking at my piercing and not at my face.
Because their eyes were crossing.
Yeah, like they were looking at my nose, and I was like, that is so distracting to me that like you're very clearly looking at my nose ring, you're not looking at my face. So I literally only had it for, you have a question?
Yeah, is there a picture of this somewhere?
No. There's
It
not.
is a naturally distracting thing, though. I mean,
it is
you're supposed
distracting.
to look into
And
somebody's
now,
eyes, but if there's something bright and shiny right here, you're like,
and
ooh.
ever since I had that experience, now I like catch myself doing it to other people, that like if they have their nose pierced, I'll like look at it, or I'll like catch myself looking at it. But I think it's kind of like, I guess my thing with it, and I think this goes for piercings too. And you know, we've obviously had the tattoo conversation. I have a tattoo. Gosh, I have a tattoo. And I think it's kind of falls into the same category of like, there's to a certain extent a little bit of ambiguity there, but for me it always comes back to like, why am I doing this? Like what, like I have my ears pierced twice. I had my nose pierced. I quickly realized I didn't like it. I took it out. I never thought about it, never thought twice about it again. With like my tattoo, I got this tattoo, really felt like, read this at the time, really felt like this is something I like, I want to write this down somewhere that I'm going to like look at it. I want to write this down somewhere that I can like see it every single day. Now I've since had the thought of like, oh, I would get a tattoo of that. I would get a tattoo of that. And I think I like to think I'm a little wiser than I was when I was 22, when I got this tattoo. I do think a lot about like, why am I doing this? And I think that applies with piercings too, of like, why am I doing this? Like,
yeah,
am I doing it because I want to look cool? Dan, am I doing it because he never mind. I'm not gonna dime you out. He just privately messaged me. Am I doing it because I want to look cool? Am I doing it because I want people to like look at, you know, like, I don't know, like why do we do those things? And I think there's a very real thing of like, okay, it's fine. You can say that looks cool, but like, do I need to do that? No, I don't need to get another tattoo. I don't need to, you know, get a third ear piercing. I don't know. That's just what my internal dialogue about it. Nicole, do you have any thoughts about it? You have ears pierced twice too, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I think it's up to your discernment of it. Honestly, it's the intention behind it. If it's like, part of me thinks it's, I don't know, as women, like there's the joke of like, you have a bad breakup and you like cut bangs and it's like always a bad idea. Because you're trying essentially to have like a new phase, like this is the new me. And I think there are some things in life where you can say, you know, maybe the tattoo has a meaning of like moving on from such and such thing, or the piercing is like whatever. It does come down to your intention. Like, that's a difficult thing. And I think that's why style is so great, because what makes one person feel super confident and really like who they are and they feel really authentic can make another person feel like they're completely misrepresenting themselves, like it's a costume even. And I think, you know, that's something that we can talk about too another time maybe. But really like how clothing can be like a persona more than really who you are. And a piercing can be like that, and a tattoo can be like that, of where you're trying to like look like a certain celebrity or movie character, James Dean, what have you. Like, is that really who you are?
Right.
Are you really a biker guy? So it's like
you even
he
have
was a
bike.
skater boy. She said, "See you later, boy." Okay, that's my contribution to that.
Oh, that's bringing me back right now.
Avril Lavigne, that was maybe the best contribution you've ever made to this podcast.
Wow.
Oh,
See ya.
Actually,
Divine
Dan,
mercy.
come back because
Divine
I was going to
mercy.
ask you something. You can't even hear us.
That was a very immodest comment.
I'm sorry. I apologize. No, Dan, actually, I was
Respect the suit.
going to quote you, but I was wondering if maybe I'm actually quoting Ben, and I just think I'm quoting you. But I was
Most likely, you're probably quoting Ben.
But I was going to say,
You're dressed like
said to
Avril
me-
Lavigne right now.
who, me?
No, Dan.
I'm wearing white.
Sorry. I won't interrupt anymore.
I'm not sure where we're going right now. But go ahead, Mary Kate. Sorry.
Like way before TCI, you and I had a conversation about modesty at one point, and you made the comment to me that you had a friend who said that immodesty is essentially lying with your body. And so I think,
yeah.
oh, okay.
Sorry, keep going.
Ben was like, no, and you, okay. Anyway, so,
Not Ben.
I think that's like, that makes a lot of sense to me, because I think that sort of covers some of the other areas that we can talk about modesty that have nothing to do with the way that we're dressing our bodies, but like just our behavior in general. I think that we can behave immodestly if we're like at a party and like drinking too much, or like,
So like social norms, like
which we all know are made up.
which we all know don't exist, right, Kevin?
well,
or
Kevin's
stupid.
not here. Yeah.
He's
Well,
watching.
he's
Is he
listening.
watching?
Don't worry.
Oh, he's watching. Okay. No, not social norms. Like being, I don't know how you describe it. Do you know what I'm thinking?
It's
I'm
like
trying to say,
prudence,
Nicole.
almost. It's like
Yeah.
you're being prudent with your behavior. I mean, okay,
Yeah,
I'll
that's
give you an
maybe a good way to
example.
say
Like
it.
one time, one of my kids dropped like the pew kneeler on my foot, and like the appropriate response would be like, "Oh, that hurt," like because you're in mass,
Yeah.
But like if that happened and you were totally unaware of yourself and unaware of your surroundings,
Mhm.
maybe you'd let out a curse word, maybe you'd scream at your kid, like
That is-
so it's a matter of like having self-control. That's really what it is. It's like, can I have self-control in
Yep.
these moments, and
Yep.
I feel like some people try to use clothing or lack of clothing to speak for them. Maybe they're not confident enough to speak for themselves. Maybe they don't have self-control in their speech because of whatever reasons. And so they use that as a way to speak for them.
Mhm.
Interesting.
That is exactly what I was. Yes. Perfect. Okay. Any other questions in the chat? I feel like we should,
No, I
If
think
we're
we
landing
did all
the
questions
plane,
in
we should-
chat. Yeah.
we did. Any last minute comments, or Nicole, is there anything we didn't touch on, Ben, that you guys want to share, or
I mean, I thought this was really fun. I
The
mean, the thing about modesty is that you can talk about it for so long because it is so nuanced. And I
Yeah.
think it,
Mhm.
maybe if people think we missed something, maybe there can be a number 2 on this or something, but
would love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Well-
do have an email.
We do.
Wait.
I'm so glad you said
Do
that.
you have an email address?
Apparently.
I'm pretty sure I've said it. We have an email address twice, and both times Dan has said we have an email address. So we do
I
have
still
an
don't
email
believe
address. It's the Chicago Inquisition at gmail.com. I should check it. I haven't checked it in a couple weeks. We're also on Instagram. If you don't like sitting and watching our faces talk for an hour and a half, 2 hours on YouTube, you can also listen to the podcast in bits and pieces, as many of our friends do, on whatever app you listen to your podcast on, including Castbox, because Dan insisted.
Because
So,
cheapskates need the gospel too.
Cheapskates
Cheapskates
need the
gospel,
gospel. Join us. There are 2 subscribers on Castbox. I am one of them. I'd love to know who number 2 is. You're probably watching right now. We know
Who's
you're
the
watching
other
right
one?
now.
Are they watching right now? They're probably listening tomorrow.
Some
Probably.
Android
Yes.
user. I mean,
I mean,
Some
they're
Android
cheap
users
like
for the new
me.
episode.
They're cheap like
Wow.
me. They got nothing else to do. So this is
Wow.
great. This is
That is a big wow. All right. So without, I think you guys, I think that's it then. Oh, comment of the week. Is there a good comment in the
Oh
chat?
gosh.
Kevin O'Malley comment of the week.
I want to thank the little pup for joining us for the whole
Yeah, Giorgio.
episode.
He did so good.
Giorgio.
Oh yeah.
It was a little rough there for a minute.
It's okay.
It was great. Are you kidding? It was perfect. I loved it. I loved it.
I'm gonna go to Alley Cats 14. Speaking of which, I watched Alley Cats Strike a week ago, the Disney Channel original movie. So
Oh my
that was
Wow. That's a
Um,
throwback.
great. It
if
is.
I've ever
The
heard
comment that she wrote was that,
That means you've been leeching Monica's Disney Plus account, doesn't it?
hey, she said it was okay.
Yeah. Okay, keep going.
You just lost your Lululemon's sponsorship, is her comment.
To who?
From Alley Cats 14. You just lost your Lululemon sponsorship. So
Oh, we did. Okay,
Yeah, we
because
did.
we
Yeah.
Well, Lululemon's really
Coleman chair.
expensive.
so they would have had a good sponsorship for us. So
I mean, I actually kind of feel like Kevin had some really funny comments.
he doesn't count. He can't.
Why? He's in the chat.
I don't know.
How about I'm pretty oblivious to what women are wearing?
Yeah, I
That was
mean,
one of his comments.
yeah, I thought that was a pretty good comment. Why do we feel the need to dress for the occasion? That's the most Kevin greatest comment of all time.
I
Because
feel like
social
all the
norms don't
comments, yeah.
exist.
Uh-huh. Yeah, here we go.
All right. Well, so what are we doing?
Alley Cooks.
Allie. All right.
I'm in the week.
Congratulations.
Rub it in Anthony's face. It's fine.
We should. All right, guys.
Nice.
Who wants to close in prayer?
Popcorn Dan.
Oh,
Popcorn
man.
Dan. Cool.
Okay. Let's pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord Jesus, you have given us our bodies, which are good and which are beautiful. We ask for the wisdom to be able to see the human body for its true goodness. And we ask for the courage to be able to represent ourselves with dignity to both ourselves and to others, both in our dress, our conduct, our actions, our thoughts. We ask for purity of mind, heart, and spirit, pure like your mother Mary was. And with her intercession, we ask for a greater understanding of the beauty of ourselves and of all your creation. And all this we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen.
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 In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Nicole and Ben, thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Yeah.
guys.
So great.
Thank
So
you.
Good to
great.
be
for
back.
having us. It was
Yeah.
fun.
Good
Thank
meeting
you.
you, Nicole.
So
All
good
right.
to
Good
meet
seeing you,
you
Ben.
Good to see you,
One
Zach.
of these days, we'll get Nicole out to Chicago, and then we can all
guys. Yes.
hang
That'll
in
be fun.
person. Yeah.
That'll be fun.
All right, guys.
See
Everybody
everybody
have a
next
good
week.
night. Talk to you guys later.